Why isn't my life as amazing as yours? Because your creative team sucks?
Coming to paperback and e-readers, John Haynes, 1987. Learn lessons about life and teenage love in the 1980s with this coming-of-age John Haynes story. Pre-order your copy of John Haynes, 1987 at online booksellers everywhere. Modern Spider-Man comics are hot garbage, and a recent storyline by new writer Zeb Wells shows how far the character has fallen due to incompetent editorial and no talent hack writers. Now, in a recent storyline in the latest volume of The Amazing Spider-Man, this new writer, Zeb Wells, has come up with an extremely convoluted story about a villainous mathematician, Benjamin Robin, who has decided to enact revenge on Peter Parker by merging him with the Mayan god Wyatt, and this pulled Spider-Man into an apocalyptic alternate version of New York City, where Mary Jane was left stranded alongside a survivor called Paul, and in that time, reality moves much quicker. What the fuck? And as a result, when Spider-Man returned to Earth 616, Mary Jane found herself stranded in what felt like weeks for him, but was years for her. And as a result, when Peter Parker finally got back with Mary Jane and looked to bring her back to the 616 Marvel universe, he learned that Mary Jane now has a family with children and is heavily connected to this alternate world. Now, this latest plot twist is the latest one to try to drive a wedge between Peter Parker and Mary Jane, and it's a really horrible plot point that really is one of the worst ones I have seen so far. Now, Marvel Comics has gone out of its way to try to break up Peter Parker and Mary Jane over the last, I say, 30 years, and as a result, Spider-Man comics have gone into a major creative decline from its heydays in the early 90s when it was being written by legendary comic book writer David Michelinie. Now, when David Michelinie was writing Spider-Man in the late 80s and early 90s and was working with legendary artists like Todd McFarlane and Eric Larson, the book was at a major high point in terms of storytelling and art, and the book was at that high point because David Michelinie was a master craftsman who knew how to tell great stories. Now, in 1987, Peter Parker went out and married his longtime girlfriend, Mary Jane, and many in editorial at Marvel thought this was a bad idea, and they thought it was a bad idea because they thought it would age the character. However, David Michelinie managed to do a fantastic job of navigating Peter Parker's life as a young married man, and the action and adventure continued at a fast pace, and we got fantastic stories like the gang war with the Kingpin. We got stories like the Venom storyline, and we got all sorts of fantastic adventures all throughout the late 80s and the early 90s with Peter Parker navigating life as a young married man. But that didn't stop Marvel editorial from having issues as related to Peter Parker being married. And because they had issues with Peter Parker being married, what they wanted to do was try to break up that marriage. Unfortunately, as they tried to break up that marriage, they wound up breaking the character of Spider-Man. And that really started with a storyline in the mid-90s known as the Clone Saga. Now, the Clone Saga basically wanted to pick up on story points that happened in the early 70s, and they wanted to say that this clone that the Jackal had made was the one that lived, and that the real Spider-Man had died. And this was a plot point that basically alienated a lot of longtime Spider-Man fans who saw the gaslighting as related to continuity with this plot twist, and as they saw the gaslighting with this plot twist by Howard Mackey, they wound up walking away from Spider-Man comics, and as they walked away from Spider-Man comics, Marvel was in the middle of a bankruptcy with Heroes World, and their attempts to try to get into distribution. And this was something that did damage to Marvel because the flagship character wasn't leading the brand. The flagship character was meandering in a bad storyline that basically caused ripple effects throughout the continuity. So this was the first attempt to try to break up Peter Parker and Mary Jane, and it led to a complete mess with the Spider-Man books, because this plot twist didn't flow organically, and the editorial was just all they were thinking about was breaking up Spider-Man and Mary Jane, and even worse, they wanted to say Aunt May died, and all of that really had a major impact on the dynamics of the Spider-Man books, because the Spider-Man books have certain components that make them work, and those components are that Peter Parker is supposed to be a young guy who's supposed to be out here living his life by day, and he's supposed to be fighting crime. And again, you're pulling him away from elements like Uncle Ben. And again, Uncle Ben is core to the Spider-Man character, even though he has been dead for over 60 years. It is the death of Uncle Ben that drives Peter Parker to be motivated to have the great responsibility as related to the great power of Spider-Man. And sadly, that's all been lost over the last couple of years as writers have just gone completely off the rails. Now, as they have been trying to break up Peter Parker and Mary Jane, they wind up having to bring them back together, and oftentimes a lot of these creators feel resentful, and one of them is Joe Quesada, who thoroughly hated the Peter Parker-Mary Jane marriage, and he decided that he wanted to find a way to end it once and for all, but sadly he wound up further derailing the Spider-Man character. And he derailed the Spider-Man character by completely compromising the character's whole values, and by having him make a deal with Mephisto in a storyline that came out around 2002 or 2003 called One More Day. Now, this One More Day storyline is one of the worst retcons because it basically destroys everything as related to the foundation of Spider-Man's whole lore, because it leads to Peter Parker going out here and making this deal with the devil, and this deal with the devil basically changes all of Marvel's entire continuity by saying that Peter Parker never married Mary Jane, but Mary Jane and Peter Parker's marriage is a major part and canon of the Marvel Universe, and this storyline basically derailed the entire character's whole story platform and story paradigm, and this just again caused a ripple effect in the Marvel Universe. One More Day was a complete disaster as a storyline creatively for the Spider-Man character, and as the character had just managed to find his feet after the disaster of the Clone Saga, Spider-Man wound up falling once more, and he never really got his momentum back after that. Now, after this, the Spider-Man character, yes, he's around, and he does well in licensed merchandising outside of Marvel's publications, like the Spectacular Spider-Man animated series and the Sam Raimi Spider-Man movies, but the Spider-Man character in the comics has been in a free fall, I say, for a good 30 years, ever since the decisions to try to derail the marriage of Spider-Man and Mary Jane Watson, and this latest turn is the third worst decision I have seen as related to the Spider-Man character, and it's a terrible decision because while these creators want to break up Peter Parker and Mary Jane so that Peter Parker can have a freewheeling life as a single man, it throws off all of his dynamics, because over the last 20 to 25 years since Joe Quesada decided to create the One More Day storyline, what has happened is Peter Parker's whole paradigm has fallen completely apart and gone so far away from what Stan Lee and Steve Ditko created, it just isn't the same character anymore. I mean, Peter Parker is far removed from the character he once was, and he's no longer even a character that is any sort of fun like he was back in the 60s and the 70s and the 80s and early 90s. No, the Peter Parker character has become a very grim, morose character, and He's no longer out here working hard at being Peter Parker by day and an aspiring scientist who sells pictures on the side to J. Jonah Jameson. In fact, the Daily Bugle is a pale shadow of its former self. Everything related to Peter Parker's life is not what it used to be. And with everything gone as related to Peter Parker's life, the soul and the heart of Spider-Man is practically gone at this point. And it's just really sad because Marvel's editorial is obsessed with breaking up Spider-Man's marriage, when Spider-Man's marriage basically would have kept the heart and soul of Spider-Man's stories alive. And it was possible to do a great story with a married Spider-Man because David Michelinie has done a great job with a married Spider-Man, and a recent book over at DC Comics has shown that you can do a story about a married hero with children, and that is, I believe his name is Jeremy Adams' Flash. Now, Jeremy Adams basically breathed brand new life into Wally West after a series of horrible stories like the Crisis storyline, the Heroes in Crisis storyline, which basically derailed the Wally West character, and Jeremy Adams has basically brought Wally West back to what he was back in the 90s, a fun character who was building a life and a family and having fun, fantastic science fiction style adventures with his wife, who now has powers, and his two, now going on 3 children. I mean, the Flash now feels like a fun version of that's similar to The Incredibles, and sadly DC wants to derail this with some dark horror elements, but the book right now under Jeremy Adams has just been a bright, fun, hopeful book. And this could have been the template for Spider-Man. Spider-Man could be that fun, hopeful character. Unfortunately, we've got a lot of people in editorial who want to believe, oh, making Spider-Man and other heroes miserable is going to generate sales, but this isn't what generates sales. This is what alienates people, because people already have problems, and we don't want to go into a world of comics where we have to deal with a character who is having problems. Yes, Peter Parker, when he was a teenager and a young adult, had his struggles, and he also had what they call the Parker bad luck, but he was always hopeful and optimistic, and he always wanted to use his power responsibly to go out here and take on the bad guys who are now in the background of his own book, instead of being there as a part of the focus of his book. When I look at Spider-Man comics, I don't see the legendary cast of characters that Stan Lee and Steve Ditko created. No, all of those characters have basically been pushed to the background as Spider-Man has turned into the young and the restless, and as it's turned into the young and the restless, we get convoluted stories from writers like Zeb Wells, who decide they're going to go out here and give us all of this soap opera plot twist with Mary Jane and alternate realities, storylines that are just so contrived and convoluted, they don't even work at all. Because in order for a story to work, it has to come from the organic roots of that character and that character's history, and it has to come from the organic roots of that character and that character's history to get readers excited about the book, and then get them so excited that they want to go back to find out where this character came from. And a lot of these new jack villains that these new writers come in and try to create for Spider-Man, they just don't work. And they don't work because they don't really have good story dynamics. And again, everything is so far removed from the original Spider-Man that I don't feel like there's anything amazing or spectacular going on in Peter Parker's life. I mean, Peter Parker, as I see it, should be like what Wally West is right now. A guy who went out here and was a hero in his teens, a hero in his young adult, and now is working at the side of somebody like Tony Stark or Reed Richards, and going out here learning more about science. And as he's learning about science, he then goes and rolls solo and goes out here and takes on the bad guys. That's what Peter Parker should be doing right now. And he could have done that while he was married to Mary Jane. He didn't need to go out here and be single. And a lot of writers try to force Peter Parker with characters like Black Cat, but the dynamics just aren't there. And a writer basically proved this. I believe David Michelini proved it back in the late 80s, that Black Cat just couldn't get with Spider-Man because the dynamics just weren't there, because Black Cat loved Spider-Man and she could not love Peter Parker, whereas Mary Jane loved both Peter Parker and Spider-Man, and she accepted that Peter Parker and Spider-Man are one and the same. So you have writers trying to rewrite everything, and as they rewrite everything, they make a mess of the Spider-Man character. And the Spider-Man character, again, the writers they don't know what to do with this character. But when I look at Jeremy Adams' Flash, I see a template for what to do with Spider-Man. And when I look at I forget his name, the Nightwing series that's currently going on right now by Tom Taylor, I see what to do with the Spider-Man character, because Tom Taylor's Nightwing is a fun series and it's heavily entrenched in the DC universe. And while Dick is his own man, he is connected to the DC universe and is the friend, like Superman, while in the world of Batman. And again, his book is absolutely fantastic. Same thing with Wally West's Flash right now, that's by Jeremy Adams. Two of the best books currently going on at DC, and a template for what can be done with Spider-Man with a writer with vision. Because if I were writing Spider-Man, I want to get the character back to his New York roots. I want to get the character back to living New York life. And I want to get away from all of these convoluted plot devices like symbiotes, like Spider-Verse. All of this stuff basically takes away from what made the character popular. Spider-Man is not all about symbiotes, which is an overused plot device. Spider-Man isn't the Spider-Verse, which is another convoluted plot device. I want to get back to good old-fashioned, organic, New York flavored stories with Spider-Man fighting crime here in New York City, and get back to Spider-Man taking on his rogues, and taking on his rogues in a way that brings back the old Spider-Man dynamics that were shown in the classic Sam Raimi movies and in Greg Weisman's The Spectacular Spider-Man, where New York City was just as much a character of Spider-Man stories. That's what I would want to do if I were writing Spider-Man right now. And if I had to, again, he would be married to Mary Jane, because we want to escape to a world where Peter Parker can at least have some comfort of having his woman at his side, instead of just going out here and drifting. Because a woman helps a man get direction. And again, this is all about bringing back the dynamics of Spider-Man that are fun, and also bringing back Aunt May and bringing him back to his Queens home, because Spider-Man works when he is in Queens. He works when he is in New York City. He works when he's swinging webs in New York City, because Stan Lee made him to be like a Tarzan going through an urban jungle. And again, all of these dynamics have basically been lost by writers who just don't really know the character, don't know the lore, don't know how to make the character fun. No, what they do is just go out here and create these convoluted plots like this one with this mathematician and Mayan gods. Again, this is just absolute garbage. It's not good writing. It's not good storytelling. And it doesn't really just draw you in. It just makes you shake your head. And every time I read a Spider-Man comic, it's just so miserable. You got Peter Parker working for Norman Osborn, which is something he would never do. And there are other issues I have with Peter Parker, like him being an Avenger, that just doesn't work for me, because Spider-Man rolls solo. Yes, he can team up with heroes in a book like Marvel Team Up, but he ain't gonna be no Avenger. He ain't gonna be no X-Man. He ain't gonna be a part of the Fantastic Four. Yes, he will work with these different heroes, and that's why I could say he could work with a Reed Richards or a Tony Stark as related to working in the lab, or he could work with them with an under supervisor, and the under supervisor could be the one who's out looking out for him, and then getting frustrated because he's constantly moving away from his desk. This is the kind of stuff that could be interesting. And again, if you had the right writers, they could find a way to grow Peter Parker and have him still have the Parker bad luck, but still go on and still just be a regular guy who wants to use the great power that he's given in a responsible manner. And as he's using that great power in a responsible manner, he's still learning about science. He's still working on developing different types of tech and different types of skills. And again, we've had a series of bad writers who just have basically made a mess of the Spider-Man character. And Spider-Man, like another character I talked about previously, Wonder Woman, is in a dire need of a rebuild, and this character needs to be rebuilt in a way that gets him back to his roots, because fans don't want to see a miserable Spider-Man. They don't want to see a Spider-Man going through divorce. They don't want to see a Spider-Man who watches as his wife is out here, ex-wife is out here banging another dude and having kids with other dudes. That's not the fantasy that people want to see. That is not the fantasy people want to escape to. That is not the fantasy people want, that believe is amazing. No, this is the kind of fantasy that brings us into a world that's outside of our window, that shows us all the misery and blight. And that's not the Spider-Man everybody wants to go and escape to. No, they want to see a guy who spins the web and he sighs and catches thieves just like flies. They want to see a Spider-Man who is fun and amazing, and they want to see a guy having an amazing life and having a great life, even though he's got some hard times here and there. We want to see Spider-Man just being Spider-Man, and we want to see Peter Parker just being a guy who has learned how to take the great power that he's given and use it in a responsible fashion. And we need responsible creators who can go out here and make this character amazing once more. Now, I have a comic currently on Lulu right now, John Haynes at Death's Door, and if you want to pick up a copy of John Haynes at Death's Door, where the man who rules the world takes on the Greek god of death, you can find that book on Lulu right now and get a paper copy. And if you want to pick up a digital copy of my first comic with Bill Walko, E-Steam, No Good Deed, you can find that book on Kindle for 99 cents. And if you want to see me make more videos about comics or help me be able to make my next comic, you can send a donation to the Patreon, the PayPal, or the Cash App by clicking the links in the description box. That's all I have to say for this video. You can comment, rate, and subscribe. Now available in paperback and e-readers, John Haynes, Godbreaker. The man who rules the world takes on the Asgardian god of thunder in this action-packed, all-new John Haynes series adventure. Get your copy of John Haynes, Godbreaker in paperback and e-readers at online booksellers everywhere.